Hey, this is Izzy from the Strumbellas. I'm here to talk a little bit about the behind the scenes of the Greatest Enemy video, and I'm here with animator and director Luca Tarantini. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, happy to be here.
Gave you this prompt of like kind of a person like getting out of bed and like putting on their skin, and it felt kind of gruesome, and we didn't really want it to be that gruesome, but kind of capturing that essence of that idea. Kind of what were, when you heard the song and you kind of heard our general first ideas, what did it prompt for you for like your first ideas for the video?
My first ideas for the video from the song and from your prompt was kind of like you said, following a character around in their day to day. But as I started experimenting with different designs and doing a bit of storyboarding and stuff, it kind of, it all started with that character walking down the street that's in the first shot of the thing. And that set the tone for what is this character like? And then I started thinking about like, okay, what if it's not about their daily life? What if we get sucked into like some internal world where there's like a struggle inside them, and it could be like whatever kind of landscape we want.
Yeah.
So I went in a totally different direction. But that's the thing with prompts. It like you guys were telling me what you were seeing for it, and I kind of took like I distilled it and tried to rebuild it into something else that could work like really cool visually and just be like a more interesting video.
Totally. Like we had this idea that we wanted to reflect the meaning of the song, but we didn't really know what that meant. So we did lean on you quite a bit to be like, and make the storyline. And you went with it in a really cool way.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, it turned out, man, it was a struggle. Like it was because the process of the video was so complex, and we'll get to this like later on, but everything had to be planned ahead of time, like fully storyboarded and everything. So probably half the time spent on the video was just storyboarding and feeling like these sequences fit together and the timing was right and stuff like that, and that it kind of told the story.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different parts to the story. Just in the, I don't know how long the song is, 3 minutes. It really goes through a lot, and I almost like it's just a little movie because it really tells a story. So fitting all those different scenes and the parts together so seamlessly to make that story and have that clear beginning and end, I'm sure was pretty tricky, like you said, in the storyboarding.
Yeah, it was hard, but yeah, like I said, like that was half the time on the video, but it was time well spent because it planned out everything. But
Yeah, it definitely paid off in the final product for sure.
yeah, totally. And the story of the video with the character kind of like breaking into two, and one half tries to run away and leave them, and they're chasing after them. Early on, that story was more about one character kind of like almost their shadow self, like breaking loose, and they're trying to get to them and like destroy them, basically. But thinking more about it and like listening to the song more, it didn't feel right because it kind of sends the wrong message. Like, I think part of coming to terms with the more difficult sides of yourself, or like the part of you that brings you down, and when you're your own greatest enemy, you can never really destroy that part of you. You just kind of learn to live with it, but like to deal with it, and maybe even sometimes have it be beneficial in your life. And in a way, having insight into your shadow self completes you more as a human being. And so in the end, instead of like, one character cutting off the shadow character's head and like holding it up or something, it's more like they merge into one and they become like one complete character together.
Totally. I think you're right. I think that idea of your personal struggles, the parts of you that you don't like, the parts of you that you struggle with, they are still part of you, and you have to learn how to kind of take them into your whole and create your full person, not just be trying to slay those inner demons, which I guess is part of our struggles, but also learn how those are part of you and make them maybe even into something positive.
Yeah, totally. Making something positive. Yeah, that's a big thing. So that's kind of how the story came together.
Great. Yeah, so we started talking about a little bit about the process, but before we kind of get into the nitty gritty, I thought we could talk about just like the overall aesthetic for the video, because that's something that you came to us really early on, just in our first conversations, looking through old emails and stuff. You really had the idea of this more physical, tactical look, and that like cut wood, painted wood construction. What kind of led you to that aesthetic?
That kind of like handmade look that would be like impossible to actually do in the real world is always like very attractive to me. But it was mostly inspired by you in the beginning, because you came to me really liking the Magic Man video I did for Brave Shores, which was it looks like it's all construction paper, but it's like very intricate, like text and images and stuff like that. And so that's how I started thinking about it, and then thinking about like creatively how much I've grown since I did that, which was almost 3 years ago, maybe 2.5 years ago. I've learned a lot about 3D and stuff, and I started thinking like, okay, what if it's still like cut out layers, except instead of paper thin paper, like it has some depth to it, and like these are pieces of wood, like little blocks or like pieces of plywood that have been like jig cut kind of thing. And I did some early tests, and that first test I did ever was actually the eyeball moving around in the intro. And that it just worked so well that like now it made it part of the video and kind of defined the look of the character in a way with like the big eye.
Totally.
But so, yeah, it just came from wanting to take previous work one step further based on like the things that I had learned in the years since. And it wasn't really something I'd seen before, but it was something like mentally I could imagine how to do it.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the most exciting place to be, when you have like a mental image of what you want, and it's something you haven't seen done before. It's like you're in the beginning of a yellow brick road, you know?
Yeah, I've never seen a video like it too, which is super exciting. And I think it was just like you said, we liked that more natural look that you did with the construction paper. It really intrigued me, and I think intrigued the rest of the band too, to be, like I said, our first animated video, and it felt like sort of this natural foray into that world of animation that fit with the band's aesthetic, but still had that animated. And like you said, making it look like something natural, even though naturally you could never do that.
The video looks like, you know, it's cut out of like 10,000 pieces of wood, which is like impossible thing, but that's the awesome thing about animation. But also like the thing with 3D animation usually is that by default, it looks very, very artificial. And, you know, if you see on Instagram, all these 3D animators, they just lean into it. They do use like beautiful plastic textures or like transparencies or like all this stuff, and they just let it look like artificial and perfect. But I think it's so much more interesting to like see how much you could beat that down into something that looks tactile, because you have to design the chaos, like the way that all the layers are kind of a little bit offset every frame, as though they were placed by someone, but like not perfectly. You have to design that in and create expressions to make the layer move every single frame to a new place and stuff like that. It's like designed chaos in a frame, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's something, as like someone who doesn't know anything about animation, that's so cool to hear about, because there is something about the video with those, you know, quote unquote imperfections and that tactile feel that really makes you feel like you're in the video and that you're experiencing it, I think, in a different way than when it's so polished, because you can almost picture yourself touching it, because it does have that natural look.
Cool. Yeah.
So you gave me a file of some of the behind the scenes. So do you want to take a look at that, and we can talk a little bit more about the process?
Yeah, let's do it. So this is like a montage of all this behind the scenes stuff, but I'll try to explain it as we go. This is how the worlds start out. Yeah. Okay.
I started a little ahead, so I'll go back for you here.
Okay.
So here we go.
First, this is just a clip of the storyboard, which was kind of an animatic that we started with. This is like the shark scene. And you could see it, like it's mostly there. You see the two people swimming towards each other, and then the shark coming from behind. That was like verbatim what it ended up being.
Yeah.
And so you can see the world start off as a true 3D world. Those are the characters. They're rigged. You'll see in a later shot. This is like the fish scene. Those swarms of fish were simulated. It's like a simulation people use for birds to make them look like they're swarming, but I did it with fish. Cool. And here you can see the characters have skeletons. They're rigged for mocap animation, and that's how I animated them.
What's up? I'm just going to pause and ask you, what's mocap animation?
Motion capture.
Oh, motion capture.
Yeah, so sense. Instead of like moving their arm frame by frame or whatever, you actually just act it out in front of a motion capture device, and then that gets transferred to the characters so that you could do like tons of different animation very quickly.
That's cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah,
cool.
So it starts off 3D, as you can see in these clips, but once I put the camera moves in and get the move through the environment that the shot needs, then so this is, you can see the stack of clouds. This is what a texture looks like. A texture is just a bunch of nodes that are connected with different properties.
Yeah.
This is what, like, how the materials are built.
That's cool.
And then this is what it looks like after. So the 3D layers get rendered into 2D images, flat with no shading. This one's a bad example because this scene was a mix of 2D and 3D, but like this. So it's a stack of 2D layers based on the rendered down 3D images. And here you can see the shark has become totally 2D.
Yeah.
So it's like a second interpretation on the 3D image that it started as. And that's how you get these 3D images to get flattened down.
Yeah, it's cool when you see it move around like that.
Yeah.
Really get the visual.
This is the rendering process in super fast motion. Each frame actually took more like 3 to 5 minutes, but this is like sped up, so you can kind of see the visuals like evolve and then kind of final product. That's
awesome. Yeah, it's cool to see it as that kind of from all angles here.
Yeah.
To really visualize that 3D.
It looks cool, seeing behind the curtain. It's like you're like side stage at a play.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Side stage at a show.
Yeah.
And it's funny because when you're side stage, you see all these details you wouldn't from if you were from the audience, but then you're also missing parts of the big picture.
Yeah.
That's cool.
And obviously you see a lot of like, not mistakes, but things that you wouldn't see in the video from these views, like the way that background texture repeats.
Right.
It's fine because where the camera is, but it's so these are all the pieces coming together. Yeah, so that's like a whole mishmash of how it's made, how the sausage is made. Those are the sausage bits.
That's very cool. I feel like I learned a lot just in that 3-minute clip.
Yeah, it's pretty complex, so I'm sorry for anyone out there whose eyes glazed over, but hopefully it's somewhat interesting.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks.
Yeah.
Were there favorite parts of it? Were there parts that you really enjoyed working on, or like you said, that maybe were things you hadn't tried out before, or were new skills that you were applying?
Yeah. The whole process was new, really. The only thing I had done each of these things individually, like made 3D videos and done other stuff with extrusion and shadows, but combining them all like this had never been done before with like 2 or 3 different discrete steps. And the more steps you have, the more problems you have, because invariably every step will screw up somehow. You will have screw ups at every step. So the more that you have, the more like dense it is. That was a learning curve for sure. But my favorite things to work on, I think, were, I don't know, like seeing it come together with the materials and the lighting.
Yeah.
Like those first few renders I was doing where it's like the textures are jumping around, like every frame is a different piece of wood and the lighting is like reflecting perfectly on the thing. And that stuff was cool. I think my favorite scenes are the explosion, like the shark exploding with like that crazy background, building up to that big like sensory experience of all that, like the shiny background and the layers and the pieces of kind of gold kind of coming off them. That was tough, and it was a hard balance because it has so many colors that typically you want to like restrict the numbers of colors you're using,
right?
Just so that it doesn't feel like you're painting the rainbow or like. But getting that right was tough. but having like the most amount of colors without it feeling like silly.
Yeah.
I feel like it was a good mix. But a few times when the renders were coming through, and it takes a long time. Like some of the scenes took like 20 hours. Like I think jumping off the cliff, that scene, the tunnel to the cliff,
Yeah.
rendering that out at 4K took about 20 hours, I think. So a lot of
Wow.
like overnight rendering. But seeing them coming through and watching them and being like, damn, this video looks good.
Yeah. I mean,
Made
I
it
want
all worth it.
to talk about that particular scene a little more, because that's one of my favorite scenes. And we talked a little bit, and you talked in when we were playing that clip about the 2D and 3D coming together. So I just want to ask you a little more about that, and how you came to decide to do that, and how that worked for you.
That scene in particular?
Yeah.
That scene, it was going to be like rendered down into 2D flat layers, kind of like everything else. But I think it was the transition from coming out of the tunnel and then like the door falling and then coming out. I think as I was working on that early on, I'm like, this isn't going to work to render it down. It's not really like possible. And I think it was because the depth of the tunnel or something would have made it really weird. So I'm like, okay, what other ways can we do this? What if I just left that world 3D? But then I'm thinking like, okay, well, then the characters need to look 2D still, because or else the characters will be mismatched. They'll be like 3D and weird. So when I got the camera move set, I rendered one pass of just the characters to get their 2D versions. And then I kind of like removed them and put them back in as 2D versions, like kind of directly in front of the camera, almost like so that they would always be in the right place. It's hard to explain.
I'm asking you to explain too much in too little time, but
yeah, basically that scene was even like deeper cheat, I guess, because the characters are 2D, but the world was left 3D.
Yeah.
And so again, it was just another layer in making that work. But it was kind of the only way to do it. And sometimes you just got to do the extra step if it's the only way to make the scene work.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And it's such this like pinnacle moment in the video. So it worked out really cool.
Yeah. And it got simplified a lot too. In the early storyboards, it wasn't going to be a cliff. It was going to be like the characters were crossing a bridge and the bridge snaps and then they both fall down and then it goes into the falling scene. But as I was making the scenes, I'm like, I can't do this bridge. This is too much. This is like a whole other thing. Screw
it's a
the
whole
bridge.
video, the whole video amount of work just for the bridge.
Yeah, exactly. So I was like, okay, what if one of them just jumps off the cliff and the other one chases him off and jumps off the cliff? Okay, fine. That works.
You could have just said, oh, but I like this vision so much better.
Well, I know, but sometimes, I mean, and you wouldn't know. And I do like what it ended up being more than if it was the bridge. But
right.
Sometimes you gotta like pivot. You gotta adapt your ideas and not be married to the original idea in places where you don't have to be. Like in that case, the bridge could have gone, whatever. The point is that they have to start falling. So there's other ways to do that.
Totally. I think like in any creative project, you can get bogged down in these little details. Like even in songwriting, maybe you get really stuck on one word and you could spend so much time doing that, but maybe it's better to step back and say, okay, like how are we going to make this work? How are we going to change this up so that the song works overall, so the video works overall, instead of getting bogged down in that one thing that was in the original vision.
Yeah, totally. And it's something that you learn after working like creatively for a long time. There are different levels of detail. There's like the wide level of detail that is, what is this entire song? What is the shape of it? Or this video, what is the shape of it? And then there's like, what does this section do? What does this section do? What does this section do? And then even deeper, it's like, what does this moment do? What does this moment do? And then even deeper than that, it's like, what does this texture look like on this frame? Or like, what does that sound of that snare sound like? Or like whatever. But you're always kind of zooming in, zooming out, and you have to maintain like this mental control over the scale of how you're looking at the project in scale. And if you're having trouble at one scale, you can always kind of zoom out and be like, okay, how can I solve this problem by looking at it at a different perspective? And sometimes it was kind of the opposite. It was like me looking at this project, the final scene with the explosion, I didn't really know how that was going to work. I just knew like this is like 40 seconds straight, and it was basically one frame in the storyboard, and it was just the two guys like next to each other. I'm like, okay, how do I stretch this into 40 seconds? And that was me going down into a very fine level of detail and creating these amazing backgrounds and movement and textures and stuff that could carry it for 40 seconds,
Right.
and kind of like put you in a daze. But that wasn't like a top-down thing. That was like a detail that you only find out to make the scene work, like very close in.
Yeah.
So yeah, scale is important, moving between different layers of.
Yeah, and finding the scale that makes sense for
Yeah.
for whatever instance of the project you're working on at that moment.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for coming on and chatting. I'm going to link to your Instagram because I know you've posted a few other details if anyone's interested about particular scenes. But thanks for chatting and the awesome video.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks for having me. And
Yeah.
thanks for making the song so I can make this video.
Yeah, I'm sure you've heard it like roughly. No one's heard the song more than you.
Yeah.
Not
probably.
even us, probably.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. So I hope it's not driving you too crazy.
No, it's an awesome song. Could listen to it forever.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks, Izzy.
Okay.